name is Ulinka Rublack and I'm a historian at Cambridge University, and I'm here at the Korean Herbarium Libraries at Cambridge University. I'm going to talk about the Garden of Eichstätt. So that's a celebrated book in German history and the history of the book worldwide. It was published in 1613, and it's so famous because it's the very first time that one man decided to have his garden documented in print. The book was created by a man called Konrad von Gemmingen, and von Gemmingen was the bishop of a small place called Eichstätt in the south of Germany, and he was a man shaped very much by his experience in the French wars of religion. So the terrible massacres that happened when Catholics and Protestants confronted each other in France. And he really wanted to found a vision of peace and beauty, and his garden was integral to that vision. The name of the pharmacist who was responsible for getting the plants drawn and engraved, and of course, making sure the botanical citations, references were right, was a man called Basilius Besler, and we see an engraving here depicting him as well. What happened was that a lot of the plants were actually cut and taken from Eichstätt to Nuremberg, which was quite a distance, so that they could be drawn from life. They would be as naturalistic as possible. Of course, this wasn't always practicable, and they would look a bit dried by the time they arrived. So he also drew on local gardens in Nuremberg. But again, that means that they were treated similar, these plants, to portraits that were, the ambition was at the time, increasingly also done from life. You'd have someone sitting for you for extended periods of time. So it's almost, we can think of these plants sitting for Basilius Besler and his team. We can ask what the bishop hoped the legacy of that book would be. And first of all, he was clearly interested in making his mark as a very wealthy man. It was original, it showed ingenuity, it showed that he was interested in knowledge, but also it was a very expensive undertaking. I mean, the end price was something like 18,000 florins, a tremendously expensive undertaking for him, but also it was sold in two ways. So this copy here is interesting because that would have retailed for about 50 florins, but if you got an illuminated version, so that was colored, it jumped up to 500 florins, and that was the price, we think, of a townhouse, a modest townhouse at the time. So even the most ardent book collectors at the time really gasped when they heard that price for a book of 500 florins. So this is a good example of what many more people would have had, a still very impressive copy. And in modern editions of it, or when we look at digitized copies of it, we just don't appreciate the size. So this was printed on the largest available printing paper at the time. It measures 57 centimeters, so over half a meter in size. And that, of course, meant that printing each of these plates would have taken probably more than a day just to get everything right. And we have, nearly 400 pages overall. So it took, we think, probably about a year and a half for different printers to put this together, and then it had to be bound into these different editions, and then coloring would have taken even longer. So he managed to do absolutely what he wanted, until nowadays. This is, as I said, it's the first book ever to have commemorated a garden and the magnificence of his wealth and vision. We have to think not just of a German and European audience for this book. In 1667, we know that a daimyo from Japan ordered his copy of the Garden of Eichstätt because it was such a famous book. If you look at earlier books from the 16th century, we know Leonhard Fuchs's book is a very well-known plant book, and others that were beginning to be printed. These were all woodcuts, and to move in technology to this and see the splendor of plants like the sunflower was really something that registered worldwide. So not only is this a moment in the early 17th century where a German bishop and his farm pharmacist network, global knowledge, it also radiated out into different parts of the world. In Germany itself, it would have been other lovers of the arts, book collectors, dukes, and others who would have wanted to own this book. But as I say, the cheaper version, which we have here, is so nice to look at because this was something for 50 florins, or unbound. Of course, it came as sheets, and then you can decide, how expensive a binding you wanted there to be. This was something that an enthusiastic middle-class man in a pharmacist, an apothecary elsewhere, also women who were at the forefront of making medicines at the time, could have decided to obtain. There are lots of surprises in the book in terms of what plants are depicted. So it moves on by the seasons. Some of the books, this one starts with winter, others with spring. So that could be arranged flexibly by the binder because you just bought the sheets. And in a way, it's quite flexible and quite nice to play with. For me, the most exciting section is probably the summer and the autumn in particular, because there we get these really fantastic American vegetables like the aubergine. You just don't expect it quite yet in Europe. But of course, if we look at the sheer numbers of plants that diversified through the global contexts and of course colonialism in the period, it's absolutely astonishing. So it almost gives us a sense of a world that was rendered anew for people, also in terms of the colors. I mean, this is what we don't see here, but we can look at painted, illuminated copies from the British Library that are particularly splendid, and elsewhere that are digitized, and that shows that the color was meant to interact with the print. You were meant to see through some of the patterns of the leaves and the plants themselves in their structure. But then they very carefully also arranged certain plants to go with each other because the colors would look nice together. And the whole range of color experience would have really exploded for someone who lived in the period between 1550 and 1613, and it registers that excitement. What drew me to this book was that it has just so many very, very beautiful illustrations, first of all, that we really know is iconic now. For instance, the sunflower. Many people have seen, but they might not know that it's from this project. And wider and more significantly, what drew me to it is that I wanted to draw attention to this cultural movement of the art lovers and their vision at that moment in German history, and to show that German history is so interested in global exchanges. The number of hyacinths, for instance, that also came from the Ottoman Empire is absolutely astonishing. And that real exuberant love, as I said, there are 49 varieties of tulips. I mean, they could have decided for 10, but they just can't limit themselves because every one of them would have looked so spectacular in its different patterns and colors. So that moment in time when art also moves out of the painting gallery and into the gardens you look at, that was very, very special in history.